The day my boss fired me in front of the entire office, everyone laughed. Not quietly, not awkwardly, they actually laughed. Some people tried to hide it behind their hands. Some looked down at their desks, but a few of them didn't even try to pretend. They just watched as my boss pointed at the door and told me to get out. At that moment, I stood there holding a small cardboard box with my things inside. My coffee mug, a few notebooks, a photo frame from my desk. 10 years of hard work, reduced to a box I could carry in one hand. And the worst part, the man who fired me believed I would never recover from it. He believed I was finished. But what none of them knew was that the very next day, everything was going to change. Because 24 hours later, I walked back into that same office building, not as an employee, but as the owner of the entire company. My name is Ethan Miller. I'm 29 years old, and the story of how I ended up buying the company that fired me didn't start on the day I lost my job. It started long before that. You see, I wasn't the kind of person people expected to succeed. I grew up in a small town where most people lived simple lives. My father worked as a mechanic. My mother worked part-time at a grocery store. We didn't have much money, but my parents always believed in one thing: hard work. My father used to tell me something when I was a kid. Ethan, the world doesn't give you anything for free. If you want something, you build it yourself. At the time, I didn't realize how important those words would become later in my life. When I finished high school, I moved to the city to study business and engineering. It wasn't easy. I worked part-time jobs just to pay for rent and food. Sometimes I slept only 4 hours a night, but I kept going because I had a dream. I wanted to build something big one day, something that mattered. After graduating, I got my first real job at a mid-sized technology company called Harrington Systems. At first, it felt like the opportunity of a lifetime. The company specialized in industrial software and automation systems, the kind of technology that helped factories and large businesses operate more efficiently. And I loved it. I started at the bottom, junior analyst, long hours, small salary, but I didn't care, because I believed if I worked hard enough, I could move up. And for a while, things actually went well. Within 3 years, I was promoted twice. My ideas helped improve several internal systems. Managers began to notice my work. Some even said I had leadership potential. But everything changed the day Richard Carter became my boss. Richard was the new regional director, tall, confident, sharp suit, the kind of man who walked into a room and expected everyone to notice. At first, I thought he was impressive, until I realized something. Richard didn't like employees who stood out. He preferred people who simply followed orders. And I was the opposite of that. I asked questions. I proposed new ideas. I challenged outdated systems. At first, he ignored me. Then he started criticizing my work. Then the criticism became personal. Too ambitious, too opinionated, too inexperienced to understand how things really work. But the strange thing was, even while he criticized me publicly, he kept approving the projects I proposed because they worked. They saved the company money. They improved productivity. They made departments more efficient. And that created a strange situation. My ideas were valuable, but my boss clearly didn't like me. For 2 years, I tolerated it because I believed things would eventually improve. I was wrong. Everything finally exploded during a Monday morning staff meeting. It was supposed to be a routine project update. The conference room was full. Managers, team leaders, analysts, about 20 people in total. Richard stood at the front of the room presenting quarterly results. Then suddenly he stopped. He looked directly at me. "Ethan," he said loudly. "Yes? Your last proposal caused several delays in the automation department." I frowned. "That's not accurate. The delays were caused by..." He cut me off immediately. No excuses. The room went quiet. I could feel people watching. "Your constant need to change things is becoming a problem," Richard continued. "That project improved efficiency by 14%, I replied calmly. Some people around the table nodded slightly. Richard's expression hardened. "And yet," he said, "the implementation created complications. That's temporary." Richard slammed his hand lightly on the table. "I'm tired of your attitude. The room froze. Then he said the sentence that changed everything. "Pack your things." For a moment, I thought I misheard him. "What?" "You're fired." Someone near the back of the room actually gasped. I stared at him. "You're firing me? During a meeting?" "Yes." "For what reason?" "Insubordination." That word echoed in the room. And then the whispering started. Some people looked shocked, others looked uncomfortable, and a few smiled. Richard pointed toward the door. "You're done here." For a moment, I just stood there. 10 years of ambition, 5 years of work, gone in less than 30 seconds. Finally, I picked up my notebook and walked out of the conference room. Behind me, the meeting slowly continued, like nothing had happened. An hour later, I left the building carrying that small cardboard box. The security guard watched me walk out, the same guard who had greeted me every morning for years. "Rough day?" he asked quietly. You could say that. Outside, the cold air hit my face. For the first time in years, I had nowhere to go. No job, no plan, just a box in my hands and a strange feeling in my chest. But what Richard Carter didn't realize was that firing me that day would turn out to be the biggest mistake of his career. Because 24 hours later, I would walk back into that same building and everything would be different. That night after I was fired, I didn't go home right away. Instead, I sat inside my car in the parking lot across the street from the office building, the same building I had walked into almost every day for 5 years. Now I was sitting outside it like a stranger. The lights were still on in several windows. People inside were finishing their work, attending meetings, typing reports, and somewhere up on the 6th floor, Richard Carter was probably sitting in his office, believing he had just removed a problem employee. I leaned back in the driver's seat and stared at the steering wheel. Part of me felt angry, another part felt embarrassed. Being fired is one thing, but being fired in front of an entire room of coworkers? That kind of humiliation stays with you. I thought about everything that had happened in that meeting. The looks on people's faces, the whispers. The moment Richard told me to pack my things, then I remembered something else. Something important. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I looked at the screen. It was a message from Marcus, one of the senior engineers in the automation department. "Marcus, that was messed up. You didn't deserve that." I stared at the message for a moment. Then another one came in. "Marcus, call me when you can." Marcus had always been one of the few people at the company who actually respected my work. He was older than me, more experienced. But unlike Richard, he cared about results more than office politics. I pressed the call button. He answered almost immediately. "Hey." "Hey," I replied. There was a short pause. Then Marcus sighed. "I can't believe he fired you like that." "Neither can I. That meeting was supposed to be about the quarterly report." "I know." Marcus lowered his voice. "You should know something." "What?" "After you left the room, people were arguing." "Arguing?" "Yeah. Several department managers said firing you made no sense." I wasn't surprised. "But Richard didn't change his mind," I said. "No." Marcus sounded frustrated. He shut everyone down and said the decision was final. I stared at the dark office building across the street. Sounds like him. Then Marcus said something unexpected. "You know why he really fired you, right?" I frowned. "What do you mean?" "It wasn't about your attitude." "Then what was it?" Marcus hesitated for a moment. Then he said quietly, "Because you were making him look bad." I blinked. "What?" "Think about it," Marcus continued. "Most of the improvements in the automation department over the last 2 years came from your proposals. That's because the systems needed updating." "I know that," Marcus said. "But every time one of your ideas worked, upper management praised the department. And Richard got the credit. That part wasn't surprising. Managers often take credit for their team's work. But eventually," Marcus continued, "the executives started asking him questions about your ideas." I sat up slightly in my seat. "What kind of questions?" "Questions he couldn't answer." Now I understood. Marcus continued. "Last month, during the regional review meeting, one of the senior executives asked Richard to explain the predictive automation model you designed. And he had no idea how it worked." I couldn't help smiling slightly. "That must have been awkward." "You have no idea," Marcus said. He looked completely unprepared. "So he fired me to protect his reputation." "Exactly." I looked back at the building again. For the first time that evening, the anger I felt started turning into something else. Clarity. Marcus spoke again. So what are you going to do now? I'm not sure yet. You should fight it. How? Legal complaint. Wrongful termination. I shook my head even though he couldn't see me. No. Why not? Because that would take months, maybe years. And I'd still end up spending my time arguing about the past. Marcus was silent for a moment. Then he said quietly, "You always think 10 steps ahead. Sometimes. So what's step 1? I took a deep breath. Step 1 is figuring out why Harrington Systems is struggling. Marcus sounded surprised. Struggling? Yes. What makes you think they are? Because companies that are doing well don't fire their most productive analysts during staff meetings. Marcus thought about that, then he laughed softly. You might be right. I usually am. We talked for another 10 minutes. Before hanging up, Marcus said one last thing. If you ever start something new, call me. Why? Because I'd rather work for someone who knows what they're doing. I smiled. I'll keep that in mind. When the call ended, I sat in silence again, but this time my thoughts were different. Instead of thinking about what I had lost, I started thinking about something else. Opportunity. Because Marcus had accidentally reminded me of something important, something most employees never think about. Companies are not invincible, even big ones, even successful ones. If the leadership is weak, the entire system eventually cracks. And Richard Carter, he was not a strong leader, which meant something interesting. Harrington Systems might look stable from the outside, but inside, there could already be problems forming. And if those problems were real, then the company that fired me today might soon become vulnerable. I started the car engine and drove away from the parking lot. But before leaving the street, I glanced back one last time at the office building, the same building where I had just been humiliated. I didn't feel defeated anymore. Instead, a strange idea was forming in my mind, because sometimes the worst day of your career is actually the beginning of something much bigger. And by the time the sun rose the next morning, I would make a decision that would change everything, not just for me, but for the entire company, including the man who fired me. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. For the first time in 5 years, I didn't have a job to go to. No meetings, no reports, no deadlines. But strangely, I didn't feel lost. Instead, I felt focused, because during the night, an idea had started forming in my mind. And the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee and opened my laptop. The first thing I searched for was Harrington Systems' financial reports. Most people don't realize this, but many mid-sized companies have public financial data available through investors, partners, or regional filings. And what I found immediately caught my attention. Revenue was declining, not dramatically, but steadily. Profit margins had dropped for 3 consecutive quarters. Operational costs had increased, and several internal projects had been delayed. I leaned back in my chair. Marcus had been right about one thing. Richard Carter wasn't a strong leader, but the real problem seemed bigger than just him. Something inside the company wasn't working anymore. I kept reading. Then I noticed another detail. One of the company's largest investors had reduced their stake 2 months earlier. That was rarely a good sign. Investors don't pull money out of stable businesses. They do it when they see trouble coming. And suddenly, a memory from 6 months earlier came back to me. During an internal strategy meeting, one of the executives mentioned something about possible acquisition interest from outside investors. At the time, no one paid much attention to it. But now, it seemed very important. Because if Harrington Systems was already being considered for acquisition, then the company might soon be up for sale. My heart started beating faster. I opened several more financial databases, then business news sites, then investor forums. After about 30 minutes of searching, I found it. A small article published 3 days earlier. The headline read, "Harrington Systems reportedly seeking strategic buyers." I stared at the screen. So, it was true. The company wasn't just struggling, it was looking for someone to buy it. I laughed quietly. The timing couldn't have been more perfect. Yesterday, Richard Carter fired me in front of the entire office. Today, the company might be available to purchase. But there was one small problem. Buying a company isn't like buying a car. Even a struggling tech company could cost millions. And I definitely didn't have millions sitting in my bank account. But that didn't mean the idea was impossible. Because in business, there's something very important called leverage. I grabbed my phone and called someone I hadn't spoken to in almost a year. The phone rang twice, then a calm voice answered. Hello? Good morning, Mr. Patel. There was a short pause, then the man laughed softly. Ethan Miller. It's been a while. It has, I said. Raj Patel was a venture investor I had met 2 years earlier at a technology conference. At the time, I had presented a concept for a predictive automation system, a system that could help large factories detect equipment failures before they happened. Most people in the audience thought the idea was interesting, but Raj had been the only one who truly understood its potential. After the conference, we had talked for nearly an hour. He told me something I never forgot. If you ever decide to build your own company, call me. At the time, I didn't think I would ever need to, but now the situation was different. So, Raj said over the phone, what can I do for you? I took a breath. I think I have an opportunity. I'm listening. You remember Harrington Systems? The automation company you worked for? Yes. What about them? They might be looking for a buyer. Raj was silent for a moment. Then he said something interesting. Yes. I heard something about that. You did? Rumors travel fast in the investment world. I smiled slightly. I have a reason to believe the rumors are true. Go on. They're losing investors. Revenue is declining, and internal leadership is weak. Raj's voice became more focused. And I believe the company could be turned around. How? With the right leadership. There was a pause. Then Raj asked the obvious question. And that leadership would be you? Yes. Another pause. Longer this time. Finally he asked, why would you want to buy the company you work for? I couldn't help smiling. Because yesterday they fired me. Raj burst out laughing. Well, that explains the motivation. But I'm serious, I continued. The company has strong infrastructure, valuable clients, and talented engineers. So what's the problem? Management. Raj hummed thoughtfully. So you believe with new leadership, the company could grow again? Yes. And you want to lead that transformation? Yes. Raj spoke slowly. Interesting. Then, he asked a question that would determine everything. How much do you think the company is worth right now? I looked at the numbers on my laptop. Considering the declining revenue, the investor withdrawal, and the acquisition rumors, I gave my honest estimate. Probably much less than people think. And maybe 15 to 20 million. Raj didn't respond for a few seconds. Then he said something that made my heart race. That's actually lower than what I heard. I blinked. What? I heard the board might accept something closer to 12. 12 million. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Because if that number was true, then buying the company might actually be possible. Raj continued. So tell me, Ethan. Yes? If I helped you put together an acquisition offer, my heart pounded. What would you do first after taking control? I didn't hesitate. The first thing? Yes. The first thing I'd do, I smiled slightly, is walk into the office where my boss fired me yesterday. And sit in his chair. Raj laughed again. You really don't like this guy. It's not about revenge. Then what is it about? Fixing a broken company. Raj was quiet again. Then finally he said, all right. My heart skipped a beat. All right, I'll arrange a meeting with my partners this afternoon. Seriously? Yes. But Ethan, yes? If we do this, this won't just be a business deal. I know. Raj chuckled. Tomorrow, you might walk back into that office building. I looked out the window at the city skyline. Yes, but next time, I won't be the employee. The meeting with Raj Patel and his partners happened that same afternoon. I expected it to be formal, maybe even tense. But surprisingly, it felt more like a strategy discussion than an interview. The conference room overlooked the downtown skyline. 4 investors sat around the table, each with laptops and printed reports in front of them. Raj introduced me. This is Ethan Miller, the man who might be able to turn Harrington Systems around. One of the investors, a gray-haired man named Daniel Brooks, leaned forward. You used to work there? Yes. For how long? 5 years. And you were fired yesterday? The room went quiet. I nodded calmly. Yes. Another investor raised an eyebrow. That's an interesting starting point for an acquisition. Raj smiled slightly. Or a very motivated one. Daniel studied me carefully. So tell us something, Ethan. Sure. If we help finance this acquisition, what exactly changes inside the company? I stood and walked to the screen at the front of the room. Then I opened the presentation I had prepared that morning. Slide 1 appeared. Harrington Systems. Current problems. I pointed at the list. Declining innovation. Outdated automation software. Management focusing on short-term profits instead of long-term growth. The investors nodded slowly. Then I switched to the next slide. Opportunities. Predictive automation systems. AI-based factory monitoring. Smart industrial software platforms. Raj smiled. He recognized the concepts immediately. These technologies already exist. I continued.